This episode is brought to you by Sterling Soap Company. Fellas, you've heard the phrase, look good, feel good, right? But why not add smell good to that too? That's where Sterling Soap Company comes in. First, Sterling Soap is 100% natural and has a wide variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, and cologne. Second, there's a scent just for you. How about burgundy? Yeah, it's more than a color. The Sterling Soap folks blend natural essential oils with hints of mahogany, golden amber, and sandalwood. Or how about D503, an intensely masculine scent inspired by Legend by Mont Blanc. And third, you will feel good about the price. For just a little more than you'd pay at the grocery store, Sterling Soap will leave you feeling clean, refreshed, and ready for whatever's next. Give Sterling Soap a try today. Visit sterlingsoap.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
When you think about the greatest hitting catchers of all time, there are a few names that immediately come to mind. Certainly Johnny Bench and Yogi Berra, and more recently, Mike Piazza, Gary Carter, and Joe Mauer. Of course, there are several others, but one name that gets overlooked just might be the best pure hitter of them all. And next, on Sports Forgotten Heroes, we're going to explore the career of that catcher, Ernie Lombardi.
This is Sports Forgotten Heroes, a tribute to the stars who shaped the games we love to watch and the games we love to play. Stars who provided us with many thrills, but when their time was up, they faded away. We'll take a look back at their spectacular careers, their moments of fame, even if it was just for one season or just one game. And now, here's your host, Warren Rogan.
Hello and welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes, episode number 160, Ernie Lombardi. Without a doubt, Ernie Lombardi is one of the greatest hitting catchers of all time. He played 17 years of Major League Baseball, mostly with the Cincinnati Reds and New York Giants. For his career, he hit .306 with 190 home runs, had an OPS of .818, and he led, as a catcher, the National League in batting twice. In 1938, he hit .342 and won the MVP award. And in 1942, at the age of 34, he led the National League again in hitting with a .330 batting average. In fact, during the 5-year stretch of 1934 through 1938, Ernie hit .305, .343, .333, .334, and .342. But he was slow. Man, was he slow. 4 times he led the National League in grounding into double plays, and his lack of speed cost him greatly, as it affected how others might have perceived him, and it just might have been one of the biggest reasons his election into the Baseball Hall of Fame was delayed until 1986, 40 years after he retired. A terrible injustice. On today's show, Robert Baker, who has been working on a biography about Ernie, joins us for a look back on Ernie's Hall of Fame career. Before we get there, though, a little housekeeping. Please follow Sports Forgotten Heroes on X at SportsFHeroes. Look for the Sports Forgotten Heroes page on Facebook, and wherever it is you are listening or watching, please follow, rate, and review. If you want to reach out, have an idea for a show, a question, or a comment, please send me an email to sportsfh.info@gmail.com. That's sportsfh.info@gmail.com. And as always, I thank you for your support. Okay, let's get going with my guest today, Robert Baker. Robert, welcome to Sports Forgotten Heroes. So glad you can jump on and talk a little Ernie Lombardi.
Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to discuss Lombardi with you.
Where does your interest stem from about a guy like Ernie Lombardi?
Honestly, it came out of nowhere. About a half decade ago, I started researching. I wanted to memorize everybody that was in the Hall of Fame. And I started with, the obscure players. And when I got to him, I Googled his name. The first thing you read about was the snooze. The second thing you learn about was that he was perhaps the slowest runner in the history of the game. And it was just fascinating to me that there's a Hall of Famer and everything you read about him is putting him down. So the more I learned about him, the more just fascinated with him I became.
Yeah, it's really interesting. An MVP, a guy that won 2 batting championships. And you're right. I mean, he just doesn't have the reputation that you think a 300 career hitter would have. And it's because, I think, of his lack of speed. He was not fleet of foot at all, and just had a bad rap. And you just got to wonder where some of that came from. Really, really interesting story. Um, and it all started in Oakland, California. Tell us a little bit about the culture in Oakland, the baseball culture in Oakland, California, back in the 1920s. What it was like there for a guy, especially like Ernie Lombardi.
Well, first and foremost, Ernie loved Oakland. The first time he actually left Oakland was when he went to play in the Pacific Coast League in the minors for it out in Utah. The baseball scene out in California, this is a time when, the West baseball went in the major league of St. Louis. So I think offensively, especially when you look at the players that came out of the Pacific Coast League in the late 20s and 30s, you're looking at Lombardi, Lefty Gomez, Joe Gordon, a couple players, more for the Yankees, Wally Berger. There were some great players. It was just even going down to San Francisco, not as much down in San Diego, but in Northern California, baseball was just as big there as it was in the major leagues for the East Coast cities.
And it was almost like a major league as well. I mean, the PCL, was, like you said, had some heck of ball players. I mean, you had Lefty O'Doul eventually and the DiMaggio brothers. And I mean, it was very competitive. And they played sometimes a lot more than 148 or 154 games.
Yeah, they played 200, 220 game seasons. DiMaggio, of course, they came in the mid to late 30s. But even in that period when Lombardi came over, like Tony Lazzeri was probably the biggest. He hit 60 home runs a season there in the Pacific Coast League. So he was the first big superstar, especially of Italian descent, to come over into the major leagues. And there were a lot of ball players, especially, Italians that lived out in Oakland. And, obviously with DiMaggio down the road. So, yeah, it was definitely more of an offensive league. The only real big celebrated pitcher that made it in the major leagues that came over was Gomez. But, I mean, there were just a ton. And it was just a lot of players didn't want to leave. A lot of players passed up opportunities to go because they thought it was on that level and they didn't want to leave home.
How important was playing for the Oakland Oaks? How important was it for Lombardi to be in the PCL as far as developing his skills to be a Major League Baseball player?
I think the biggest thing for him, even more than developing the skills there, was his family. His family, he had 3 sisters and himself. His mom died when he was a teenager. So it was just his dad who owned a grocery store, which Ernie would work at, during the off times when he wasn't playing ball. So having that close-knit family, I think, was the most important to allow him to be comfortable. And then Oakland, I mean, they weren't a very good team when Ernie was there. They were kind of a cellar dweller. But he got to play against really good competition. And unlike, say, the minor leagues now where you have A-ball, AA, AAA, he was playing with guys that right away that were 30, 32, 34, established veterans, even some that had played in the major leagues and came home. So I think it was just a tremendous opportunity for him to hone his skills.
His first year in the major leagues was with the Brooklyn Robins, a la the Brooklyn Dodgers, now the Los Angeles Dodgers. He had a pretty good rookie season. I mean, 73 games, hit 297, 4 homers, 23 ribbies. But the Dodgers had a lot of catchers. What stood out about his game compared to the other catchers of that era? And why was he the odd man out in the Brooklyn catching rotation?
Well, that word that you just used, odd, I think sums up Lombardi and his playing ability and his playing style better than any other word you can think of. When you look at catchers I use it as 1950 when you start looking at Campanella and Yogi Berra and stuff like that. You were not supposed to be an offensive talent as catcher. They wanted somebody, 5'8", 5'9", 5'10", that was agile, that called a great game, that was animated, that would be like the manager on the field. That wasn't Ernie. Now, Al Lopez, who was the starting catcher on that Brooklyn team, that was Lopez personified. He would go on to be a manager. He would take the White Sox to the World Series in 59, the Indians in 54. So Ernie really, because of, I don't want to say lazy, although that was a word that came up about Ernie's work ethic quite a bit. He wasn't demonstrative. He was more laid back. He wasn't a rah-rah guy. And when you look at the star catchers of that era, Mickey Cochrane in Philly, and Bill Dickey with the Yankees, and Gabby Hartnett with the Cubs, that's who they were. They were tough guys. Cochrane and Hartnett went on to manage. Even Dickey had a quick spell as a manager when McCarthy was gone. And Ernie wasn't like that. So him and Robinson didn't see eye to eye. Ernie pretty much looked at baseball as an occupation. He wanted to hit. That's what he loved doing. The defensive part, he had a world-class arm. People say during that era had the best throwing arm of any catcher around. But he just didn't fit Robinson's style of what he was looking for in like a field general. So after that 1 year, they traded him to Cincinnati.
And he really developed when he got to Cincinnati. But you mentioned something earlier. He was so slow of foot. He might have been the slowest guy in the history of baseball. I mean, yeah, I think he hit into more double plays than anyone. Hit into a double play like once every 25 at bats or something crazy like that. You got to wonder what his batting average might have been had he been a little bit quicker. How did he manage to be so good with a bat in his hands, hit for such a high average, and be that slow?
So, he was a big guy. If you've seen pictures of him, he's all legs, he's all arms. He actually batted with a cross-handed grip. Even before he got to the Pacific Coast League, he hurt his hand. And the only way to take the pressure off his pinky finger was to cross-hand the bat. And he had
so instead of batting like this as a right,
he had the cross hands, correct.
Easy.
And he tried to change it and couldn't hit normally. The reason why he succeeded was, if you ask Ted Williams called him the greatest right-handed hitter he ever saw, and that he hit the ball harder than any right-handed hitter he ever saw. The Dodger GM at the time, Brent Rickey, said other than Chick Hafey, there was nobody that hit the ball harder than he did. Ernie had a vicious line drive swing. There wasn't a lot of loft to it. The home runs that he did hit were line drive shots. Billy Herman, the Hall of Famer for the Cubs, said that if Ernie played on AstroTurf, he would kill infielders. And I think the biggest is Carl Hubble, the Hall of Fame left-hander. Hubble in many interviews said that Ernie was the only guy who he thought could kill him when he was on the mound. He said that his infielders would go up to him as third baseman would say, pitch him outside so he hits the ball to first, and the first baseman would say, pitch him inside so he'll hit it down to third. And Hubble said, I don't care where I throw it as long as it's right not down the middle because he'll kill me with the line drive. And Hubble was dead serious. He said in many interviews that he was afraid a line drive shot, if it would hit him in the head, would kill him. That's how hard Ernie hit the ball.
How about behind the plate? What kind of catcher was he? How did pitching staffs, pitchers of the day like to throw to him?
Bucky Walters loved him. Johnny Vandermeer was his best friend, loved him. A lot of the pitchers.
I think he caught
both no-hitters.
Games of Vandermeer's back-to-back no-hitters.
He did. And Ernie had a huge frame. You've seen him. The guy, he just didn't. He looked like a linebacker, not a baseball player. The Reds, who were not very good the majority of the time he was with them, they loved pitching to him. He gave such a big target. Pass balls were a problem. He led the league in pass balls pretty much every year he was in the league, except for a few. He didn't have the lateral motion, but he would barehand balls that were going past him. So there's many articles where in the game those like Warren Spahn said he used to catch him barehanded when he threw a ball a little outside, so he didn't have to reach his glove over. So that goes to the work ethic question. But no, he was a good defensive catcher. He controlled the running game. He was always above league average in runners caught stealing. Just the pass balls were a problem. But I mean, pitcher, it's a bad rap. You know how it is. Back in the day, before television, newspapers read everything. The sports writers read everything. And if you didn't get to see him play and all you heard about was, well, he's not very good defensively, there's the reputation.
Funny question. He was slow.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a big schnoz, huge schnoz. How much did those two things negatively affect his reputation?
In writing this book, and I'm probably 3/4 done, it's sad. I feel bad for Ernie. As much as the nose, I know he didn't like it. He hated to be called schnoz, but I think the bigger thing was being Italian. I mean, if you look at it at that time, especially, right around, World War II, look at what DiMaggio went through in the press. Look at what Tony Lazzari dealt with. Italians were looked on as not as intelligent as like you said, the big nose, not looking manly, not looking, sharp in a suit. And, just like Greenberg had to go through it when, being Jewish. I think that anti-Italian sentiment had more to do with anything than being slow. But he was a great news story. I mean, if you have a slow get mobile, where Ernie was slow. Ernie, he wasn't coordinated. He was thrown out sometimes when he hit the ball to right field for a base hit. He was thrown out at first. That's stuff that most people didn't see. But you're right. I feel like in a lot of sense, especially what would happen in the 39 World Series, he was looked at as more like a circus character than a baseball player and a human being. And that was sad. And it's hard as a human being to read those stories and even 67 years later not be affected by it.
And we're going to get to the World Series moment in a moment. I mean, just looking at his first years in baseball, in 1931 with Brooklyn, he breaks in, hits 297, gets traded to the Reds, goes 303, 283, 305, 343, 333, 334, and then in 1938 hits 342 with 19 home runs, 95 RBI, and wins the MVP award. What made that season so special for him? Why was he finally recognized for the star he was?
So I think a couple. I think Warren Giles may have had more to do with it than anybody else. He tried to trade Ernie after the 37 season. In fact, he had a deal with the Chicago Cubs done, and their GMs agreed upon it, and Wrigley killed it at the last moment because he wasn't ready to move on from Hartnett. But it was all in the papers. Giles has taken some shots at Ernie. In fact, they tried to trade him after almost every season. They wanted Al Lopez. They wanted, this Mancuso was another guy they wanted. So Ernie came to spring training in 1938 in probably the best shape of his career. There was no injuries. A catcher back in those days, the hands got beat up with the bad mitt. He had, various hand injuries. His feet bothered him throughout his career. But everything kind of went perfect for him and the Reds. The Reds moved up to fourth place, which I think had more to do with the MVP. If you look, Johnny Mize probably should have won the MVP that year, especially when you go on WAR. Johnny Mize had a phenomenal year in 19, even 39 and 40. Johnny Mize may have been the best player in the National League. But I think everything just came together. The Reds started to get better with Derringer and Bucky Walters. And Johnny Vandermeer burst on the scene. He caught the no-hitters, so he had the recognition from that. And catchers didn't win batting titles back then. And he went out there and won the batting title. And with Cincinnati's improvement in the standings, the writers finally gave him. I mean, when you look at it, he was their best player from 32 through probably 40. And unlike Dickey and Cochran, who had Gehrig and Ruth and Fox and Simmons, he had no help in the lineup. So I think when he had that great year in 42, I think it was the writers finally acknowledging his ability as a baseball player.
What I find fascinating, one of the other things that I do find fascinating about that 1938 season, again, we talked about how slow he was. And he led baseball, the National League. He led the National League in grounding into double plays. He grounded into 30 double plays. He hit 342. But he was intentionally walked 21 times. Why?
Because the Reds had nobody else in the lineup other than Frank McCormick. I mean, he never struck out, so he put the ball in play. So he was always among the league leaders in fewest strikeouts per season. So when you don't strike out and you put the ball in play and you run like he does, you're going to ground into double plays. It happens. But like I said, Cincinnati, Frank McCormick burst on the scene after being in the minors, and Ivel Goodman had a couple good seasons for the Reds in the late 30s. But he was the guy. They weren't going to let him beat him in those situations, and they walked him. And I think that tied the record with Johnny Mize actually for most intentional walks by a National League player in a season. So, Cincinnati played a ton of low-scoring games. They were dominated, like I said, with pitching with Vandermeer, Walters, and Derringer. And Ernie they weren't going to let him beat him.
The Reds finished fourth place that year, 1938. And then they turn it around in 39, and they actually win the National League. But you get to the very famous moment in the World Series in 1939. Before we get there, though, I do want to also ask, what was his reputation like amongst the other players, his team, and the guys he played against? How was he accepted or not accepted? What did the rest of the baseball world think of Ernie Lombardi?
In my research, which I spent years doing, I've never come across anybody that had a bad word about Lombardi. He was very quiet. Extremely popular. Other than Ed Roush, he was probably the most popular Cincinnati Red until the Big Red Machine. Teammates loved him. He was a kidder, a joker. He snored probably as slow as he was. He may be known more for his snoring. There's great stories about him with Chick Hafey, about how he woke up an army base, how they would give him the manager's quarters on the train, because that was the only way anybody else could get sleep. So he was a guy that they would joke with. But Ernie, and that's something that's not talked about, Ernie suffered from depression and social anxiety. And for a bachelor, look at it this way, he would get just buckets and buckets of mail from the ladies who, I know you said the big nose and the gangly figure, but the ladies loved him. He just wasn't interested. The day the season ended, the next day he would board the train or take his car back to Oakland. He was just very quiet and very private. So really, there's not much mentioned other than the occasional, he was a great guy, I loved pitching to him. There really isn't much about his personal interactions with teammates and players that are in the newspapers. He was very, not standoffish because he was friendly. He didn't have a mean bone in his body. He was just didn't like being the center of attention.
Well, 1939, it had been quite some time since the Reds had made it to a World Series. And they finally do so in 1939. And it's against, who else? The New York Yankees. And unfortunately, the Reds were swept in 4 games. There was a situation in one of the games at home plate. It's called the snooze play or the snooze moment. Um, Talk about that. Tell us what happened, and we'll go on from there. First, tell us about the play, what happened, and how unfair it is that Lombardi got such a reputation after that play. And frankly, it's sort of like a Bill Buckner play.
Yeah, so the 1939 World Series in itself is, you got to look at it. Yes, the Yankees, when you look at it, between 1936 and 1939, they lost a total of 3 World Series games in those 4 years, and 2 of the 3 were to Carl Hubbell. So the Yankees didn't lose World Series games then. They easily could have lost Game 1. Goodman made a bad play on a ball in the 9th inning that cost Derringer the game, and they should have won Game 4. So they should have been 2 games apiece. They had the lead in the 9th inning of Game 4, and a couple errors tied the game up. And then that play in the 10th inning, Goodman let a base hit get through his legs, and a run scored. Charlie Keller comes around third base, and if you don't know Charlie Keller is the prototypical either running back or linebacker in football. Not an inch of body fat, all muscle. And as he crosses home plate, if you break it down, he either collides with his thigh or he hits Ernie in the ribs. You can't tell. And he does that the second the ball hits his mitt. So Lombardi spins around and the ball comes loose. Bucky Walters isn't backing up the play, so there's nobody behind home plate. DiMaggio, who is probably the greatest instinctual ball player maybe to ever put on spikes, notices it and comes home. Lombardi finally comes to, grabs the ball, dives at DiMaggio, but DiMaggio lifted his leg up over the glove and then down on the plate. It's probably the greatest slide you'll ever see if you go back and watch the video, but that gave the Yankees a 3-run lead instead of a 2-run lead in the 10th. It really was an insignificant run. It didn't matter, but he became the laughingstock of baseball because of it, and I don't understand why to this day.
How much do you think that incident unfairly defines the legacy of Ernie Lombardi?
So I think it's right up there. I think that's what, when you don't research into Lombardi and understand the complicated relationship with Warren Giles, if you don't look at that and you just look at it, then yes, it's easy to think that kept him out of the Hall of Fame for as long as it did. What you don't understand is every single person that looks at that play never blamed Lombardi. Joe DiMaggio said the ball hit him in the cup, which it didn't if you watch the replay. Ivo Goodman, who was his roommate, said Ernie had black and blue all up in his chest from Keller. You have to understand, it was a 100-degree day there. Ernie almost missed the series because he was injured anyway, but he forced himself into the lineup and played decently well. He got hit and got stunned. It could happen to anybody. He got up. He still made the attempted tag. But since nobody saw the game on TV, if you read the newspaper comments, oh, he sat there like an elephant, is one of them said. Oh, he sat there taking a nap while the Yankees ran all the way around the bases. And that's the thing. Writers could do anything they wanted back then. Nobody, their games weren't on television. There was only 30,000 there. So they got to create the narrative. And Ernie didn't say anything. He never alibied about it. He never even talked about it. The only thing he ever said was, I don't know what happened. He refused to do that. I think what killed Ernie the most was that the Reds didn't back him up, Reds ownership. Warren Giles seemed to blame him for the loss. Bill McEnany couldn't, instead of backing up his catcher, just said, I don't know what happened, but it never should have happened. The reason why the Reds lost were the 2 errors in the 9th and the fielding error by Goodman in the 10th. That's the reason why the Reds lost that game. But it did. It made Ernie look unmanly, that he couldn't take the collision, that he didn't get up fast enough, that he just laid there. And none of that is true if you look at the video. But yeah, I think it just made him look like a buffoon. to the national media who already heard nothing but, oh, he's got a big nose. Oh, he can't run. He moves like a turtle. And that was, I think, the lasting legacy.
Did he didn't fight back at all? He didn't respond at all? He didn't
Nope.
nothing to the criticism? He never even talked about it, never haunted him, anything like that?
No, the only thing his teammates said was Ernie said, I got knocked good and I don't know what happened. Wouldn't know. And it's funny because the players loved that he did an alibi. That made his teammates, you know what I mean? Like he easily could have came out and said, hey, listen, what about the shortstop and second baseman that made the 2 errors in the 9th inning to blow the 4-2 lead? What about the right fielder who blew game 1 and let the ball go under his legs to let another run score in the 10th inning? He could have easily did that, and it would have been justifiable for all the criticism that he was receiving. But no, he took it in silence. Whether he knew it was, I mean, you can't battle the whole media. But no, it definitely ate at him. I know he was tired of hearing about it, but he just internalized it and just took it.
As slow as he was, the guy was one heck of a hitter. I mean, again, 38, he wins the MVP. That's 342. In that 1939 season, he hit 287. Now we go to 1940. He helps lead the Reds to the World Series. He plays in 109 games, hits 319, finishes 9th in the MVP voting. The Reds do go to the World Series. They play against the Tigers. They beat the Tigers in 7 games. But Ernie wasn't a big part of the World Series. What happened?
No, so mid-September, he was chasing a foul ball in Ebbets Field, and he stepped in the gutter and severely sprained his ankle. He tried to play through it, didn't. But again, the 40 World Series again was dominated by pitching. Newsom was fantastic for the Tigers, almost won 3 games in Game 7. But Bucky Walters and Derringer, shut Detroit down to get that World Series. And I think, like you said, Jimmy Wilson was the guy who came from the coaching sidelines. He was the third base coach for the Reds. But with Hirschberger's suicide and Ernie getting hurt, Wilson became the starting catcher in the World Series. And then the thing is, well, how valuable is Ernie? He played in 39 and we lost. We had a guy who was 40 years old, can barely move at catcher in the 40 series, and we win. So, he couldn't win either way.
Did Ernie get along with his managers?
So, I mean, he was a rookie in 31, so him and Robinson really didn't have that much of an interaction. Again, I think it was more Robinson, being a catcher himself for those old Oriole teams, had a vision of what he thought a catcher should be. Should be demonstrative, should be get in your face, take charge. That was Lopez, that wasn't Lombardi, so he had his catcher. McEnany, him and Ernie were fine. There's not, they weren't buddy, but there wasn't any, at least pre-1939 World Series, there wasn't any animosity. Deacon, as they call it, McEnany, he grew up at the feet of McGraw. So just like McGraw, he wanted a catcher that was demonstrative. And that's why they kept trying to go after Gus Mancuso, and they tried to get Al Lopez. He was a pitching and defense first. So I'm assuming, the relationship wasn't great when you constantly hear your name in the newspapers of being traded, even after winning the MVP. But there's nothing in there that the two didn't get along. I think he should have stuck up for Lombardi after 39. And he didn't. He made, when Ernie slumped in 40, there were comments that, and I don't even think he slumped in 40, because I still think, he hit 287? He still had a pretty good year at 40.
1940, he hit 319. He hit 387, 287 in 1939. In 1941, his final year with Cincinnati, that's when he hit 264.
But he considered his 39 season a slump, since he dropped from winning the batting title all the way down.
342 to 287.
Correct, which is still not bad for a catcher.
5-point jump. I drop, but still, like you said, 287 is a good batting average.
Correct, but then he made comments about him not taking his physical condition seriously enough. Ernie was a constant holdout in spring training. It wasn't for the money because he never made much. It's because he didn't want to leave Oakland. He didn't want to leave his family. He left at the latest possible moment. But it just seems like everything, it's almost like nothing he did was good enough. And that's a tough way, and I think that's why when he finally was traded, I think he was okay with it.
Why was he traded? I mean, so 41, was it they thought maybe he was washed up? He's 33 years old. It's 264. Then they trade him to the Boston Braves. And he rebounds with a 330 batting average for Boston in 1942.
Won the batting title.
One of his 2 batting championships.
It's kind of funny, right? He gets almost traded after 37, wins the batting title in 38, gets traded before the 42 season and wins the batting title. So he may have been the most don't get me mad or I'm gonna destroy you. I think they looked at his age. They looked at he had been, hampered with hand injuries that had, impacted him from that 38 season. Unfortunately, while amazing for him, every season after that was a letdown to management. Even 319 was not 340. He was getting even slower as age went about it. I think they did it as a punishment, to be honest with you, because the Giants offered more, the Brooklyn Dodgers offered more to purchase Lombardi, and Giles says, no, we don't want money, we want players. But then he sells them to the last place Boston Braves for money. So I definitely do think there was a little bit of Giles and Lombardi did not like each other. And Giles, of course, was the owner of the Reds, who would go on to be, the president of the National League. After his 38th season, at a party for him before he left for Oakland, Ernie got a little drunk. When he went up to give his speech, he basically said, I'm not playing for this cheap owner anymore. Little spicier words, nothing bad. Nothing that should have turned Giles against Lombardi like he was. But yeah, I think after that, Giles was waiting for the perfect opportunity to get rid of him.
So he goes to Boston, hits 330, but that's the only year he played in Boston. You said the Giants and the Dodgers wanted him.
Mm-hmm.
He did make his way back to New York. This time with the New York Giants and Mel Ott. What happened there? Why did Boston say bye-bye?
Boston was cheap. I mean, and you have to understand, like, the 3 worst teams in baseball in the National League between 1903 and 1940 were the Reds, the Phillies, and the Braves. The Reds had, up until 39, they only won 1 pennant, and that was 1919. The Phillies in 1915, and the Braves in 14. So they figured, hey, Ernie had a great year. Let's try to sell him at the highest amount that we can get for him. So they sold him. I really think he would have been a Giant probably in 1942 if Bill Terry would have stayed the manager of the Giants. He was a big Lombardi fan. He did not care for Gus Mancuso, but Ott was a big Mancuso guy, being his teammate for so long. And then when Terry stepped aside to become the GM and Ott took over as manager, that ended all conversations with the Reds for Lombardi. So Ernie knew his worth. He always wanted to be traded to the Giants, Dodgers, or Cubs because he figured he would be paid more in those larger markets. So he was very happy to go to New York.
Yeah, and he went and played with the Giants for 5 years. Had a decent career with the Giants overall. With them, he hit 288, had 55 home runs. He had a decent career with the Giants. 305, 255, 307, 290, 282. Home runs were 10, 10, 19, 12, and 4. So, and he was an all-star his first year with New York as well. So what, I mean, tell us about his years in New York. I guess I sort of just summarized it, but.
No, yeah. I mean, it was fun. He liked being in the bigger city. He made more money. He was definitely glad to be rid of Gabe Paul and who was, taking over kind of into power more. He was brought into the Reds by Warren Giles. So he was definitely glad to be out of there. it was difficult too. He was transitioning from being a star player to a backup. He was going into that role. And like I said, I talked to Jerry. We discussed it a lot. There's a lot of similarities between Johnny Mize and Ernie Lombardi. As a lot of people remember Mize as being a hanger-oner with the Yankees the last 5 years of his career. A lot of people see Lombardi as a backup player for the Giants at the end of his career. So, yeah, I mean, it was Giants, by that time were not the team they were obviously in the late 30s when they went to 2 World Series. They really didn't do much in the 40s until, in the 50s when DeRocher took over. So it would have been great to see DeRocher manage Lombardi. But, yeah, it was just he was happy there. He ended up meeting his wife and getting married while he was playing for the Giants. He went out he failed his Army physical. He did try to join the military when he was, with the Giants. But yeah, it was kind of transitional.
Um, I mean, how does Lombardi compare to the great catchers like a Mickey Cochran, a Bill Dickey, or in latter days Johnny Bench? The guys of today. How does Lombardi compare?
So I spend a lot of time with myself thinking about how to rank players, especially I get WAR. I also don't like WAR, and I'll tell you why.
Confusing.
Well, no, it's not that, but like if you take say players of Lombardi's era, if you have a guy on second base, you were supposed to hit the ball to the right side, get him to third, and allow them to score. That's a better play than somebody just striking out now. An out's not an out. So what I like to do is I like to use 1950 as a cutoff point because that's when teams started moving, newer stadiums were being built, everything like that. So I think, although, Mickey Cochran played on winners, he had the 29, 30, 31 A's. He also was the manager for the 34 and 35 Tigers. To me, I think even though he had better players in the lineup, same as Dickey, I think those two separate themselves. Whether you want to go Dickey 1, Cochran 2, or Cochran 1, Dickey 2, I think they're the two best catchers pre-1950. I think Lombardi fits in either at 3 or 4 with Hartnett. You can do either one. Ernie was the best catcher in the 30s in the National League. Hartnett was the best catcher from like 25 to 34 in the National League. So I rank Ernie 3rd or 4th. Which isn't bad when you consider like the first 70 years of baseball to be the 4th best catcher of that time.
I mean, and then you had guys like, it's funny, Yogi Berra, but Yogi Berra was just such an anomaly, The guy never saw a bad pitch that he didn't like. You know what I mean?
No, but was Yogi a catcher? Was Yogi an outfielder?
Right,
exactly. Was Yogi a DA? You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's why I used that 50s, because I think more modern baseball I look at in the 50s, just of where I cut it off, because then you have Berra, you have Campanella, then you have Bench coming in, everything was different there. Catching equipment was different. The way the game was played was different. What you expected, like when Berra came on, all of a sudden it was acceptable for catchers to be powerful hitters and defense to be less. You see what I'm saying? That's not how, like in the dead ball era, even though the dead ball era ends kind of, in the early 30s, they still expected you to be a glove first catcher. So, and I think Lombardi suffers for, just like Johnny Mize and Hank Greenberg suffer for playing the same time as Lou Gehrig and Jimmy Fox. I mean, even look at like Hal Trotsky. Look at some of Hal Trotsky's numbers in the 90s. Dude couldn't sniff an all-star team because he wasn't beating Gehrig, Greenberg, or Fox. And Ernie will always be looked at for not being Dickey and not being Cochran, and I don't think that's fair. There's nothing wrong with being the 3rd best player, man, in 70 years in baseball.
I did a show on Hal Trotsky. The guy was one heck of a hitter.
Man, before those headaches came in, one heck of a hitter.
Yeah. Speaking of headaches, after Lombardi retired, he did suffer from depression, and he even attempted to take his own life. why do you think he struggled so much after his playing days were over? And was that at all common for players of the era?
When you look at something I try to do, studying baseball history, is I try to put myself in the day and age in which they lived. And, in that time, men didn't talk about being depressed. You were supposed to do, like, look at the people in the mines, the people that had to do that kind of work. You would go to work, you would go to the bar afterwards, you'd go home and eat dinner, and you'd do it the next day. I think Ernie absolutely suffered from some form of mental illness. The reason why he failed his Army physical was social anxiety. And that became a joke. Oh, how can a baseball player who plays in front of 30,000 fans every day be afraid to be around other people? Um, yeah, so obviously for somebody who whole life was baseball, you retire, you're away from the game, but then the World Series with the Yankees and Dodgers happen when Berra is thrown into it because, of the error he made that helped the Dodgers win, and all of a sudden, right on the head, oh, another Lombardi. You know what I mean? So that got to him. His wife and him purchased a liquor store for him, and he was unhappy with that after a couple years. And then I think, although there's nothing that links one event to the other, the way he tried to kill himself is eerily similar to Hirschberg.
Well, yeah, that was my next question because that is what a crazy story. And you mentioned Willard Hirschberger before. If I understand the story correctly, he goes to the manager of the Reds and says, my dad committed suicide. I'm going to do the same thing. And then he doesn't show up to the ballpark the next day. They go to the hotel or his home, wherever he was, and he's dead. Committed suicide.
Yeah, that is a tragic story. When Willard was in high school, he went hunting. And when he came home that night, instead of putting the shotgun away, he left it leaned up against the closet door. His father took that gun that night and killed himself in the bathroom. Hirschberger is the one that found him. I think from that day forward, he blamed himself. Oh, if I would have put the gun. And what's really strange is his sister and him were the ones that found the body. His sister even said he never uttered a word about that event ever. And when Hirschberger killed himself, he did it the same exact way, except he used a razor blade. He went into the hotel room and he actually put towels down because he didn't want to leave a mess like his father did for someone else to clean up. I don't blame McEnany for that at all. When he explained that situation to him, McEnany took him out to eat. They spent hours together. Then they went back to the hotel room, and Willard said, "Okay, I feel so much better now. I'm good. I'm fine. And that's when he left. So it's not like McEnany just went like, "Hey, he really did try." People didn't understand mental illness back then like they do now, and that's why I think Ernie had to be thinking about that for a while, because he was actually, the day he committed suicide, he was going to a sanitarium. His wife, after months of him just being depressed, finally got him.
The day he attempted suicide.
Correct. So they went and they stopped at a friend's house before they went, and he said he had a headache. He was going to lay down. He found a straight razor in their friend's medicine cabinet, went into the bedroom and slit his throat. He begged his wife not to call the ambulance. He begged the medics that got there to let him die. It was bad. At point at the hospital, they were not optimistic at all. Fortunately, they were able to stop the bleeding and fix him. He went to a sanitarium for some months after that, and his nephew said that he noticed a change with him after he got out. There's no mention of the treatment he went under. I know from research, treatment back then for that tended to be a little barbaric. I don't know what he went through, but his family did say he seemed more happier and at peace after the event. But it makes you wonder how much of Hirschberger was going through his mind during that period, because it is almost exactly similar to that attempt.
Yeah, yeah, very, very strange. Um, Ernie Lombardi he was a great hitter. He was a great baseball player. Heck, the Cincinnati Reds have a statue of Ernie Lombardi outside their ballpark. He was not inducted into the Hall of Fame almost 40 full years after he played, nearly a decade after he passed away. Why did it take so long for Ernie Lombardi to earn such recognition?
I mean, there's a lot of reasons. The first being, if you look at the Hall of Fame voting system, even in the first year of voting in 1936, baseball gave the writers two objectives. One, vote for 5 players that played the majority of their career after 1901, and give us 5 players that played the majority of their career before 1901. They did great with the first 5 selections: Ruth, Wagner, Mathewson, Johnson, and Ruth. And if I said and Cobb. So those 5. They couldn't agree on any for pre-1900. So it has been an issue with the Hall of Fame voting by the writers since day one. Another reason is, I mean, even if you look at the 1980s, I mean, Archie Vaughan didn't get until the 80s with the Veterans Committee. Johnny Mize didn't get in till I think 85 or 84 for the Veterans Committee. So those were great players. I just think his being on the ballot, that falls on the writers. But I mean, you look at the players that took years to get even back then. Some were better than Ernie. So the ability for the writers to do their job during that period of time, and there were rules changing. You could vote for these people. You couldn't vote for these people. You could do 2. You could do 1. Here's a list. So that's one. The reason he wasn't voted in on the Veterans Committee is Warren Giles. After doing the research, after reading people who were in the room during those votes, and he was the head of the Veterans Committee, Giles. Yes, he
really held a grudge.
And Gabe Paul did afterwards. There's a part in the book about Bertie Tebbetts, and when he finally got to be a voter on the Hall of Fame committee, as soon as he sat down, he said, "I want to nominate Lombardi." And Gabe Paul said, "No, we've discussed him at nauseum already." And Bertie turned to him, and he was close with Paul. He goes, "In all fairness, you've never done it with me in the room." And afterwards, they voted, and Ernie didn't get in. And him and Paul went out to lunch afterwards, and he said, "Did you vote for Ernie?" And he goes, "I didn't vote at all out of respect for you." And he turned to Gabe Paul and said, "That's nonsense. The only reason you won't vote for him is it's personal." Warren Giles brought Gabe Paul into the baseball business. He's the reason why Gabe Paul became the general manager of the Cincinnati Reds. When Paul was general manager, Bucky Walters tried to hire Ernie on his staff. Paul said no. So and as soon as Gabe Paul left the committee, after Warren Giles had passed, and there was one writer who I don't recall his name, once he got off the Veterans Committee, that was the year Ernie got elected. So it was absolutely personal and the sad thing is, it killed Ernie not to be in the Hall of Fame. Absolutely killed him later in life. He turned bitter about it. In an interview, he told the media, he goes, "I don't want them to vote for me now, because if they do, I won't go." He was so hurt about not being recognized that, I mean, I think it ruined the rest of his life.
Wow.
Look at all the players, though. Like Johnny Mize, by the time he got in, his mother was too ill to go. That destroyed Johnny. And Ernie wasn't. Earl Averill said, "If I'm dead, don't let them vote me in." And he got in late.
Yeah, just this past year.
Look at Dave Parker.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. That's where I was going. Dave Parker deserved to be in. It took him so long to get in. Unfortunately, he passed just before the ceremony, but it should have never come down to that.
What good is it to be voted in? The greatest thing about being in the Hall of Fame is being surrounded by the other legends in the Hall of Fame. If you do that to them after they're dead, what's the point?
What's the point?
Pete Rose is the perfect example. Pete Rose died, and now all of a sudden he's eligible to be in the Hall of Fame.
Makes no sense.
As
a Mets fan, I always go back to Gil Hodges. He was fine.
Oh, that was horrific.
The guy, long after his death.
Listen, that's one of the main things I study is Brooklyn Dodger history. I hate the current Dodgers, love Brooklyn. I told my wife, and we've been together since we were 18 and 19, I said, I will not step into the Hall of Fame until Gil Hodges is elected.
It's just
the summer after he got elected, I went to the Hall of Fame. Explain that to me. As popular as he was.
And Ichiro this year, one guy didn't vote for him. Why?
It should have to be public.
Why would nobody vote for Ken Griffey Jr., Tom Seaver?
Man, Ty Cobb and Babe Ruth and Honus Wagner, Christy Matheson, Walter Johnson, they weren't unanimous?
It's ridiculous. Babe Ruth. It's ridiculous.
Getting back to Ernie, his story to me is tragic. I think it was he lived a sad life after baseball. I think all he wanted was to just be recognized for what he did on the base. It wasn't an ego thing. Ernie didn't want to talk to people. Ernie didn't like doing autographs. Ernie didn't want to be meet and greet. Had absolutely nothing to do with ego. He just, I feel, had a sense of wanting to belong. And I feel like, and I think the statistics speak for themselves, but you have people like Bill James and you have people like Jay Jaffe who write their books. Jaffe didn't think Hodges deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. Bill James didn't think Hodges deserved to be in the Hall of Fame. And here's the perfect example. Kind of like how Ernie is tortured for the 39 World Series, Hodges was tortured for his 0 for series in 52. But what nobody talks about is he drove in the only 2 runs of Game 7 of the 55 World Series that Brooklyn won. So if he doesn't drive in those 2 runs, Brooklyn probably doesn't have a World Series. So that's the thing. You don't hear, besides Joe Mauer, who has 3, Ernie's the only catcher in baseball history that has 2 batting. Not Bench, not Campanella, right, not Berra.
Yeah. And it was years between the time that Ernie Lombardi won his 2nd batting title and another catcher won a batting title. Yeah,
absolutely.
Just crazy stuff. Hey, Robert, I can't wait to read your book. I'm eager to see it coming out. Good for you. When it does come out, we'll have to reconnect. But for now, I want to thank you for joining me on Sports Forgotten Heroes. This has been a terrific hour.
I appreciate it, man. It was great talking to you. And if for anything else, I just hope people learn the goodness and the great career Ernie Lombardi had.
Absolutely. Thanks again for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Ernie played for 17 years. His first year was in Brooklyn, where he hit .297 as a part-time player. His 10 years with the Reds were phenomenal, batting .311 with 120 home runs and 682 RBI. With the Giants, he hit .288. His 1 year with the Boston Braves, and we talked about this during the show today, resulted in a National League leading .330 batting average. Thanks again to my guest today, Robert Baker, and thanks to all of you for joining, and I'll see you next time on Sports Forgotten Heroes.
The Sports History Network, where legends live on and the past plays loud. Welcome to the place where history's proud. From gridiron glory to the hardwood stars, from the racetrack heat to Olympic bars. It's the voices, the stories, the moments you miss, told by fans and pros who live for this. Hook and Themic, the Sports History Network, where the past comes alive. Podcasts and blogs that keep the flame high. From Babe to Brady, Alley to the Dome. If it's history and sports, then this is the home. SportsHistoryNetwork.com, the headquarters of sports yesteryear.